going to go over some vocabulary from the first week, because I understand that if you're new to women and gender studies, or if you're new to academia in general, some of these terms might not be familiar to you, or you might have forgotten them from like your Western Civ or World Civ class in high school. So I've charted them out here on the whiteboard behind me to help both you and I sort of understand what the purpose of this lecture is and where we're going, and hopefully will inspire you to take some notes, because if you'll take notes over my lectures, you'll have that written record to look back to and refer back to as you make your posts each week in the docs section, and then at the end of the week in the events section. So I'm just going to start at the top of the list. They go roughly in order of the pages in our textbook. So I'm just going to start with Peggy McIntosh's article called White Privilege, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. So I hope you enjoyed this reading as much as I enjoyed it. It really brings some things to light that wouldn't normally be brought to light unless we were looking at them in a specific way. So as we go through our terminology, I hope you see that the white privilege article intersects really interestingly with women and gender studies. And as my bottom question here asks, why even study gender? I hope that this introductory lecture and terminology lecture helps you to understand maybe a little bit better why someone would study gender, and why it's necessary, and why we still need to study women, gender, and men. So I'll start at the very top of the list with the word hegemony, and the pronunciation of that word is hegemony, like Jiminy Cricket. So if you'll go to page 13 in your textbook, on the left column of the page, about 2 or 3 sentences down, it says, "Those men who do grant that male privilege takes institutionalized and embedded forms are still likely to deny that male hegemony has opened doors for them personally." So the question here becomes, what does that word hegemony mean, and why is it useful to us when we're understanding gender? Well, gender is really complicated, but the biggest thing that you have to remember when we're talking about gender is that there's a distinction between gender and sex, okay? Someone's sex is biological. When a baby is born, we tend to look between their legs and see to what sex they correspond. Is there female sexuality or male sexuality in their genitalia? And that is what we mean when we say sex, okay? The word gender is something entirely different. Gender is the roles that we perform in society and in culture. So in Western civilization, and actually in most civilizations around the world, that gender, the way that we act in society, corresponds directly to the sex that's between our legs. And that's just been, the two are said to have a mimetic relationship. The one imitates the other. So if you're born with a vagina, you automatically are assumed in our culture and society to take on stereotypically feminine roles. So, and if you're born with a penis, then it's taken for granted that you're going to perform masculine roles, right? And we all know what those are. They were given to us as children from our parents and from our society. We were told to sit like a girl and act like a man and be a good little boy and dress like a woman. Our ears were pierced, or we were given baseball caps at an early age. And if you're one of these, if you're a child who didn't have those gender roles enforced upon you by your parents, you still had them enforced upon you by society. In elementary school, middle school, and high school, through the television, through the movies, through even cartoons, right? Think about Smurfette. Okay, I'm not going to go there, but I'll start up here at the top with hegemony. Hegemony is the way that society kind of controls and manipulates us into acting the way that it would want us to, all right? So one of the most pervasive forms of cultural hegemony is economic or racial or gendered hegemony. A society that has hegemony kind of covertly manipulates its citizens into performing certain types of roles depending on what environment they're in and what role they need to perform at that time. So if you are, for example, a single, white, middle-class female, heterosexual middle-class female, then you know what you're supposed to be doing in life. You know how you're supposed to be acting. Heterosexual women are supposed to be attracted to men, right? Middle-class women are supposed to dress a specific way and drive a specific car. And white women are supposed to be doing specific things and acting in specific ways and reacting in specific ways. One of the most common examples that I can think of the way that hegemony works is the way that we posture our bodies. So, for example, when you're out in public, men or women, when you're out in public and you sit down on a bench or a chair, 9 times out of 10, a woman is going to cross her legs either at the ankle or at the knee. And 9 times out of 10, a man is not going to cross his legs. And that goes back to this concept of hegemony. What is our culture telling us with these very subtle messages? Well, a man who is able to sit with his legs spread wide open is being told from a very early age that he can claim as much space as he wants. He can take up 2 or 3 chairs, he can leave chairs between him and other people, he can claim his whole space, he can even stretch his arms out along the back of the chairs and claim all of the space that he might be able to with his physical body. Whereas women are told that they need to cross their legs and take up as little space as possible and cross their arms across their bodies. And so this is just one really culturally pervasive way that hegemony works. We don't recognize that it's happening, but our culture is controlling us into how much space we're able to take up. I mean, and this just gets, it's even crazier. I was watching a television commercial the other day about multivitamins. And I found in that commercial that there was I think it was like Centrum or something. So Centrum had a female and a male multivitamin. The female multivitamin, its selling points or its propaganda points were that it would help improve the look of skin, hair, and nails, focusing on the woman's physical appearance and her beauty, not her internal health or her longevity, how long she's going to live, her quality of life, her strength, or her eyesight, any of those things. It was focusing on skin, nail, and hairs. The men's multivitamin was focused on building strong muscles. So men are supposed to be able to defend themselves, and this comes straight from our multivitamin, right? Men are supposed to be able to defend themselves in case of danger, but women are not supposed to be able to do that. They're supposed to just look pretty, according to our multivitamin hegemony, right? So let's just keep going down the list. You see very easily, if you can start to observe the way that we are hegemonically controlled, you see very easily that we're oppressed. All of us, not just women, but men are also oppressed. What if a man decided one day he wanted to wear fingernail polish? Well, most of us have preconceived notions and preconceived responses and prefabricated responses to that concept. And that all comes from the pervasive cultural hegemony that has oppressed us into one specific way of thinking. The third word on our list is meritocracy. Let's see what the book has to say about meritocracy. It's on the column, it's right after that list of 46 things in the invisible knapsack. And that first big paragraph that starts, I repeatedly forgot each of the realizations on this list until I wrote it down. The third sentence says, the pressure to avoid white privilege is great, for in facing it, I must give up the myth of meritocracy. So we know that the root word of meritocracy is merit. You know that word. Merit suggests that a person's abilities and how hard they try are going to they're going to be rewarded for those things. You recognize ocracy from like democracy, so you know it has something to do with the way that civilizations are run. So the whole term meritocracy actually means that it's a civilization or a culture or a society that believes that it is run on the idea of merit. So America is definitely like that, right? If you think about our founding fathers and the way that our country was the way that our country is described, the way that our independence and the origins of our country is described, it's definitely described using meritocracy as a rhetoric or as a propaganda point. We're taught that we can come from rag to riches. We're taught that there's an American dream. We're taught that if you just try hard enough, you just pull yourself up by your bootstraps, anything is possible and we can all achieve equally. That is what Macintosh is calling the myth of meritocracy, because if we also understand that we live in a hegemonically oppressive society, then it can't be as simple as if you try hard enough, you're going to get there, because you also have to take into consideration these interlocking and overlapping oppressions of being a middle-aged, white, heterosexual, middle-class female in the Midwest. What does that do to your ability to earn merit, right? Down a little further on the list is the word normativity. You're going to see this concept come up over and over and over, because what hegemony does is it oppresses us into what is normal. If you are a 28-year-old white male in Kentucky, for example, then there are certain things that you have to do. There are certain ways that you have to perform that's considered normal. And if you act outside of those ways, you start to feel that subtle cultural pressure kind of pushing back against you, right, from the outside. It could be as simple as somebody looking at you a little funny, 28-year-old white man, if you're sitting with your legs crossed and holding a purse, right? That's a form of hegemony. It's very subtle, and it makes us understand that we have to fit inside of a normative boundary. Similarly, if you go out and you sit with your legs completely uncrossed and you take up as much space as you possibly can, and maybe you let out a burp, I don't know, these things are not, quote, normal for the stereotypical femininity that we've established in our country in most places. I understand that that's completely normal in some places, but I'm thinking of more like metropolitan areas, right, and stuff you see on television. So, so I guess I'm also being hegemonic, right? But you'll recognize it no matter where you are. There's something that's normal, and then there are things that are absolutely abnormal, and you have to condone to those and compromise with those. Otherwise, you feel that gentle pressure from the outside, from other people, to perform in a certain way. That's normativity, and the pressure that you feel is the hegemony of gendered expectations, or raced expectations, or economic expectations. And all of this you can see very easily forms a hierarchy. That's on page 16 of your textbook. What we do when we perform these stereotypical femininities and masculinities, when we perform these either-or genders, is we reinforce the hierarchy that men are stronger and women are beautiful. For example, to use the hegemony of the vitamin commercial that I was talking about earlier. These hierarchies are instilled within us through all of the institutions that we're a part of. In fact, it's a systemic oppression that we experience with these hierarchies. The word systemic just means of the system, and we are involved in so many systems that use this kind of oppression that you can just look anywhere. Education is an oppressive system. Religion, law, all of the ones we've already been talking about. Gender is an oppressive system. Age, race, all of these socially constructed categories that we've created for ourselves to live in, to organize our societies, their fundamental thing, the thing that they rely on, is oppression, hierarchy, and hegemony. And it has to be that way inside of societies that use dual systems, like either-or systems, like someone's black or someone's white. We have a natural tendency as humans to privilege one and subordinate the other. So if we're in a male-female system, we have a natural tendency to push one up and to push one down, to lift one up and to subordinate the other. So this systemic oppression is something that happens to us while we're growing up. It's something that's built into our heritage, something that if we don't explore outrightly, it's completely invisible, deniable, and ignorable. And she gets to those points at the very end of this chapter, or at the very end of this article on pages 17 and 18. So this is why we study gender, because the things that we think are natural, the things that we think are innate, the things that we think are biologically determined, such as our gender. If we have a vagina between our legs, we have to sit with those legs crossed so as not to expose that vagina. That is one way that we think that this hegemony of gender oppression is so invisible. We just think it's natural and normal that sex and gender go hand in hand. But what we're going to find throughout this semester is that these categories are socially constructed. Gender is not biological. Gender is something that every single society on this planet decides for itself. And so we're going to keep reading these articles that show you that just the way that people in Kentucky form gender and define gender is totally different than the way that people in Uzbekistan define gender, for example, right? So we have to start seeing gender for what it actually is, and not just taking it for granted as this invisible, deniable, and ignorable thing. And that's why it's important to study gender, right? Some people are born not feeling like a stereotypical man or a stereotypical woman. They feel like somewhere in between. And the next articles that we're going to be discussing in the next lecture that I post will start to talk about what happens when we start to have people who do perform outside of the gender norms, who don't perform gendered hegemonic normativity. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and get on to that lecture, and I look forward to hearing what you guys have to say about hegemonic gender oppression.